What if your relationships would actually drastically change if you just allowed people to 100% be themselves? When I think about this, I think back to psychoanalytic theory in Freudian psychology and how there's a difference between a healthy childhood versus a survival based childhood. No childhood is perfect, of course. No parent is perfect. Every single child comes out of childhood with some level of trauma. That's the reality of it. But when healthy boundaries are put into place, when a parent allows a child to individuate and differentiate, a healthier outcome is the result. And so the fascinating thing is that later on in adulthood, people that had the healthy boundaries in childhood, people that had the individuation and the differentiation, they are far more likely to experience healthier relationships where they actually allow the people in their lives to just be themselves. And it's fascinating because I've been in relationships myself, both platonic and romantic, that have been exceedingly unhealthy, but specifically controlling. I was basically not allowed to be myself. And so the fascinating thing is that when healthy boundaries are set into place, people are allowed to be themselves. What is it that you're expecting from a person anyway? What is it that you need from them? Why is it that you wouldn't allow them to be themselves? What is actually the challenge there? It's interesting, isn't it, when you think about it? A lot of people have a very hard time allowing people to be themselves because maybe there are things about the people that trigger them. The fascinating thing there, that's a massive key towards the inner self. When you are triggered by something, that tells you more about yourself than it does about anything else or anybody else. And so the fascinating thing is that when you actually look at it for what it is and recognize that you can take this back on yourself, rather than thinking that you need to control somebody else, rather than thinking that you need to change and fix somebody else, or mute somebody else, or stop somebody else from being themselves, you can actually see it for what it is. And you can realize that you have stuff that you have to work on yourself. Something that has terrified me throughout my entire life, specifically in relationships, both platonic and romantic, has been the realization that, well, I would say it was past. It was back then. It's not anymore because I don't allow this stuff anymore in my relationships, both platonic and romantic. But it was the recognition that I would have to sacrifice serious parts of myself that are important to me just to be in platonic and romantic relationships with people. And it's fascinating because when you recognize that you're not relying on another person to fulfill you or to make you happy or to have this or whatever role in your life, whatever influence in your life, when you're not relying on somebody else to make you happy and you are sourcing that from within, what is it that you actually need other people to do? What is it that you actually need other people for? If you're happy and you can allow other people to be in your life simply because they're just there and you allow them to be themselves as they are, don't get me wrong, disrespect will absolutely not be involved in any of these dynamics. Definitely not in healthy relationships. But what I'm referring to is dynamics where people feel the need to control the way that other people are because they learned that that's just how relationships are supposed to be. And the fascinating thing is that these are usually the types of people that came out of childhood with some serious level of trauma. They did not get healthy boundaries. They did not get a healthy sense of self or identity. They did not get to individuate and differentiate. And therefore, they're looking to other people to fulfill things that are actually unhealthy. These are the people that you would probably never find allowing people to be themselves until they were actually to do the work and realize their own trauma and what it is that they've been doing. It's not healthy to be in a relationship with somebody that tries to control how you express yourself. And how you express yourself is your boundary. And it's a massive boundary. And anybody that tries to control that is very unhealthy. So it's fascinating, right? How much your relationships could actually change if you just allow people to be themselves. And I'm not saying that this applies to you. Maybe this doesn't apply to you, and that's fine. Maybe this applies to somebody else that you know, and you can pass this video along to them. But it's fascinating how much an exceedingly unhealthy childhood leads to individuals that find themselves in relationships with other people where they feel like they need to tweak things and finely tune things and control and change and fix. You don't have to. You're just repeating patterns from childhood based on what it is that you experienced. Your parents were very controlling, and so therefore you feel the need to control people in your life because it feels safe. And it was painful to be controlled by maybe narcissistic parents that raised you in a controlling way. And they didn't let you live the kind of life that you wanted to, so why can't your friends live the life that they want to? No, you have to control them, right? That's how the dynamic has to be in order for you to feel safe. It's almost as if you are vicariously living from childhood through the pain that your parents caused you in your present day adult relationships, whether platonic or romantic. And yes, it is fucking up your relationships. Unless anybody actually based in trauma wants to be controlled, I don't believe that anybody actually wants to be controlled. When you just allow people to be who they are, it completely transforms the dynamic. People feel safer that way. People can actually breathe. They are able to trust more readily. The fascinating thing is that people that learned to be controlled, they're likely to click with people that learned controlling dynamics. And it's not healthy, but it is the way that it is. And I'm so fascinated by this, right? Imagine you take the model of psychoanalytic theory, in Freudian psychology, the whole thing of the ego state, right? And you look at that and you're like, oh, wow, okay. So my childhood did not consist of healthy boundaries. Therefore, I did not get healthy boundaries. Therefore, I don't have a healthy ego state or identity. The way that I see myself, the way that I perceive of myself is not healthy. What does that mean? The way that I perceive of other people is also not going to be healthy. So therefore, I'm more likely to put in place dynamics of control where I feel like I have to move a bunch of objects around on the fucking board to have any bit of a relationship. But that in and of itself is fucking up every dynamic of every relationship. Imagine if you were to approach adulthood the way that somebody that got a healthy childhood with healthy boundaries, individuation, and differentiation. Imagine you just allowed the people in your life to be themselves and you didn't try to control them. You didn't try to control the way that they saw you, the way that they perceived of things. You just let them be. Something that I've learned recently is that the highest form of love in relationship, I mean, I don't know if there are actually like lower or higher forms of love, but just allowing people to be themselves, just accepting people for who they are and not trying to change them. In healthy childhoods, children were accepted for who they were. The healthy boundary was put in place so that they got to form a healthy identity and that they didn't end up getting identity issues and disturbances in regards to their own psychological development. Imagine if you were to approach your adult relationships like that and you just let go. You just allowed people to be as they were. It's wild to think about it, right? So it's wild also to think about how in an unhealthy childhood, you learned fucked up dynamics. And maybe you carried that into adulthood. And maybe that's fucking up your adulthood, right? Maybe your unhealthy childhood is fucking up your adulthood. And you're actually being very controlling in your adult relationships. I'm not calling anybody out and I'm not saying that this is you. Maybe this is your friend. Maybe this is somebody else. But this is real. Because a lot of people, they deploy tactics of control to feel safe in their adult relationships because they feel like they need to control the people in their lives because it feels safe and that feels comfortable and familiar to childhood. A childhood of a lack of healthy boundaries, a childhood of a lack of individuation and differentiation. But imagine if you were just to let go, stop trying to control, and just allow people to be themselves and just accept them for them. Just see them as they are and be like, wow, yeah, cool. You're good. You're fine. Just be yourself. I love you. Give love, it's wild. And then you let go, and then actually you might find that things inside of you transform because you realize that you're just projecting outward onto these people potentially the lack of freedom that you had in childhood, all of these restrictions, all of these restraints, all of these lines that you had to stay inside of, all of these ideals and beliefs that you had to follow. What would it be like to alleviate all of that, to let go of all of that, to be free of all of that? It's fascinating.